existed in their own realm as like an ideal. There was a realm of a perfect ideal chair, or there was an ideal whatever, and then what we saw were kind of reflections of that. There were different versions of it and things like this. I can point to reading Plato a lot and in college as probably the origin of this. But this idea that things exist on three realms also kind of has this. I wanted to have an underpinning physics. I use physics very loosely here because I'm a fantasy writer, but I wanted to have it. If you read in physics, there's something called the fundamental forces. There's something that we call there's this idea that there's going to be this unifying theory. Everyone's looking for the theory that's going to unify all physics because right now we have multiple theories. And when I say theory, I mean scientific theory, right? So scientific explanations that don't all mesh yet together. And everyone's searching for the one kind of laws of mathematics that will mesh it all together. I came up with those for the Cosmere, so that when you go to the different planets, you can see, hey, these magics have some things that they share together that work similarly. That was just so that there would be consistency between the different worlds. And so eventually I'll tell this kind of larger story that involves all of the planets. I'm not there yet. I'm far off from that. But I do want to get to that someday.
So you're just warming up?
Yes, I'm just warming up. I've only been doing this for 10 years, almost 11 years now, like officially getting published. And so that doesn't seem like very long. I still feel a little bit like a newbie. In the publishing world. Yesterday, when we went to the desert stanzas, I don't know if any of you guys went on that, but then you go out in the desert and you listen to the poetry and stuff. We hung out with Garth Nix, and Garth Nix is one of the writers I was reading when I was trying to break in. Right, like he feels like yes, Garth Nix is established. He's been doing this for much longer than me, and I'm still a newbie, is how I still feel a bit. I can use that argument less and less nowadays, as this. I'm kind of one of the dominant forces in fantasy now, but I still feel like a newbie. So.
Well, it keeps you hungry, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there you are.
That's always a good way of looking at it. So let's move the conversation a little bit from the big picture now down to some of the characters, because you have some very, very memorable characters. And what I'd really like to ask is pick up maybe three characters. We can do Kaladin, maybe Sharlan and Dalinar from the Stormlight series. And maybe you could just spend a few minutes just talking about the character in terms of their true character. Who are they really?
Who are they really?
What are they really like inside? And what kind of journey arc are they going on?
Well, see, the problem is I can't talk 100% about this because one of my pitches to myself on the Stormlight Archive was that I would have 10 books, and each one would delve deeply into a character's backstory and catch them up to where the first book started. It'll actually be 2 sets of 5. So the first 5 characters will catch them up to the first book, and then when we do the back 5, it'll be a little bit different thing. But so this is we've done that for Kaladin and Shalot in Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, and I'm doing Dalinar right now. And to talk about who Dalinar is interesting because my first thought for Dalinar I can trace back to being a teenager. In one of the very first stories I wrote this story about a guy whose brother was the king, and the king was assassinated, and the brother had to decide whether to seize the throne or not, because there was a nephew who should have been king, but the nephew can't, in the original story, couldn't become king. And so the uncle's like, do I seize the throne? It's this idea between familial duty and political duty, right? Something that, maybe none of us will ever have to experience in such a dramatic way, but this happens to each of us, right? What is my duty to kind of my job or to society, and what is my duty to my family? Those are two things that compete in our lives. And one of the things we do in fantasy is we will take something like that, something that is a conflict in our lives, and we blow it up into something extreme. It's this idea of take it and really dig into it in this epic way. It's called epic fantasy for a reason. And with this one, the idea of family versus society was Dalinar, and I eventually ended up getting this into the book, is Dalinar's duty to his people versus his duty to his brother and nephew. And his nephew's a bad king. And Dalinar, it's so hard for him to not just step in and say, okay, I need to take care of the kingdom. And in fact, as the books progress, that's kind of what he's doing, is I need to take care of the kingdom. But then there's that conflict of, but now I'm disenfranchising my nephew, whom I love, but who is a bad king. That is the core of what started Dalinar. And what I really wanted to do as I built him through the books and build up his plot line was this person who he's based a little bit on I don't know how much I based his youth on the Mongolian general Subadai, who is a really dynamic and dramatic figure from history who I like reading about, though horrified by. You cannot just look and admire the Mongols during the time of Genghis Khan, or however you want to say it. You just can't, because they almost got here, right? They didn't get all the way here, but they almost got. Did they get here?
They went up until Iraq, I believe.
So So it's just crazy how far they got, and how ruthless they were. And there are parts about them you can admire, and parts of them you have to be scared of. And that idea of this character who is kind of scared of his own past, the things that he did, because of, as he's grown older, he's become more enamored with the idea of honor and things like this. That's another big core of who Dalinar is, that kind of conflict between his current self and his past self, and the things that he did as a conqueror. So Dalinar, I don't want to dig too much further in that, because the third book will really cover that.
It will reveal it, okay.
Kaladin is interesting in that his initial idea, the seed for him, was the idea of the surgeon who learns that he's really good at killing people. And you say, Brandon, that's not a normal conflict in my life. You said these all kind of start. But I think we also have that where we are different people in different situations. And some of those different people that we are, like, you almost wouldn't recognize them from one another. Like, I remember when I went to college, my first year, I don't know if this happened to you guys when you go to university or whatnot, but I became a very different person. That's a time when you grow, when you're very much apart. And this happens to a lot of students. I went away to university, it was far from my family, and I did that whole year, and I came home and realized I was a completely different person, but my family was still treating me like the person I had been, which was natural, and I slipped right back into being that person again that I had been before I left, and that was really frustrating to me. One of the most frustrating points in my life was coming home from college for a summer and knowing I had become somebody else, but knowing that my family didn't know that person yet. And so I went back to being who they expected me to be. And that kind of conflict between who we are, who we have become, and who everyone remembers us being, or who we were in our youth, is a very big part of what makes Kaladin Kaladin. That's a big aspect of it. I tried writing Kaladin. Some of you know this. In my first attempt at The Way of Kings in 2002, I tried writing Kaladin as a different style of person. What happened is, in the prologue of the original write, Kaladin won a Shardblade in Shardplate. He actually saved Elhokar's life, and the story was about Kaladin training to be a Shardbearer. And that book did not work. His personality and character didn't work at all. And I wrote an entire book doing that. And if you would go back and were to read that one, eventually, once everything that I'm doing and this comes out, I'll release it. But Dalinar was basically the same person. Yasna was basically the same person. Those two characters really worked in my initial attempts on the page. Kaladin just did not work at all. And that's when I kind of backed up and said, I've taken him the completely wrong direction. He can't You know, this can't be the story of the plucky young kid becomes a shard bearer. I've just read that book too many times.
That's right.
Right? In fantasy, that book was boring to me because other people had done it better. And I needed to take him a completely different direction and build more conflict into his character and have things go wrong for him. And that's where the revision of who Kaladin started. Shallan is based off of Pliny the Elder.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And really, when I say based on, like when I say Subadar, what really it is there's like one or two seeds of something interesting that you spin into a completely new character. I have characters that are based on friends of mine, and by that I mean there's like a character in Elantris where I had a friend at the time, Annie, who is a woman who's 6'1". And she complained incessantly about how hard it is to be a 6'1" tall, you know. She's a tall woman, no one wanted to date her, she couldn't buy clothes, it was the most terrible thing. And of course she emphasized it in her life, she exaggerated it. But that idea of, oh, you're really tall and you don't meet society's standard for what a woman should be, that spun into an entire character. Okay. And so, when I say Pliny the Elder, what I'm really looking at is, if you look at the old days, a lot of the scholars, you had to be multidisciplinary. Like Da Vinci is a great example of this, right? Da Vinci was not just a painter. He was a sculptor. He was a scientist. He was, you do all of these things together. And it's only in the contemporary, or starting in the modern era, going to contemporary, that you really see people that specialize. Now, I'm not a scientist, I am a chemist. But in the old days, you did everything. And I love this idea of people who would draw and write and theorize. They're philosopher, scholar, artists. That was so cool to me. And I built Shallan around this idea of the philosopher, scholar, artist, all baked into one. Part of the reason that I came up with her is I knew that the Stormlight Archive, the world building, was going to be so extreme. I felt that fantasy had not gone as extreme in its world building as it could and perhaps should go. And I knew that, we were going to have a land where, if you guys haven't read it, where grass, when you approach it, like shrinks down into its holes. And the beasties, the creatures, are all different. They're not things that you have from our world. And so I wanted to stick someone into this world who had a scientific and artistic way of explaining all of these things to people. And so Shallan's sketchbook and drawings were part of the main reason why I developed her as a character, so that you can open up the book. Like very early pages, you will see sketches of these creatures from her sketchbook. This goes back to Tolkien. It's become a little bit of a cliche in fantasy books nowadays that you have the map, right? You open it up and there's the map. But Tolkien did this, and it was the map that they carried with them, because it's not just some random map, it's a piece of lore from the world. And when you open up your map, you're like, wow, this is the map that they had. This is, you feel like you're more there, you're more part of it when you're holding their exact map. It's not some map that a random person at the publisher drew, even if it is. When it works, you're like, oh, this is the map from here. And I wanted to be doing things like that. I wanted you to open up and say, oh, this is the actual sketchbook page that Shallan is talking about drawing in. To just suck you into the world, to give you these visualizations of these creatures, but also make you have that sense of immersion.
So there's a lot of references here that you've made, sort of to Greek philosophers, to sort of Mongol type of generals and so on. Now there's quite a few very, very important supporting characters around, floating around. Some of them literally floating around like this friend.
Yes.
And could you just tell us a little bit about how some of those support the overall narrative, especially this friend with Kaladin?
Yeah. So one of my favorite openings to a book is 1984. And I can't quote it exactly because I'm bad at exact quotes, but if you haven't read this, it says, it was a beautiful day in April and the clocks were striking 13. which is not all that odd to you guys because you use 1300. But back then, you know, they were not on the what we call the military time, and so clock striking 13 was not something that could happen. But April was